Hey everyone, Moof Games Gamer here, and today's video is going to be about why I think the Hallowed Knights mini-campaign itself specifically is probably the best Blackmoor 2 update in my opinion. I am going to discuss about the things that I like and the things I don't like respectively. And as a bonus, I have Mecha Knuckle having a segment of his own later in the video expressing his opinions about it. Let's start with the good side of the Hallowed Knights campaign. And after I discussed my reasoning in that department, I'll talk about the bad things in it. Remember, these are heavily opinionated. In terms of stage layout and structure, it's definitely unique and different from most of the other stages. Owl Farm is pretty much like most of the stages, but after beating it, you may notice that the rest of the stages from here forth became actually unique and gimmicky, and a gameplay standpoint really provides real substance. Abandoned Hut has you try to survive from a shit-fuck ton of pigs and rats that deal batshit damage to you. Rat King is kinda annoying. Medieval Football has you kick the ball into the enemy goal 5 times to win. The Floater stage has you free movement, and instead of a main boss, you get a Pac-Man segment. And Manor, which is basically a boss gauntlet but has a maze segment, and a boss that's practically yourself. It's safe to say that the Hallowed Knights is so diversely different and unique from most of the main campaign stages that really bring in some replayability for this little expansion. In terms of the stage and aesthetics, the Hallowed Knights campaign started out with quite a vibrant and flamboyant stage with this weird music playing in the background. Despite being a bit similar to Stage 2, it's alright. Abandoned Hut, admittedly, is the weakest one, but for uniqueness, it qualifies well. Medieval Football really stands out in terms of unique gameplay mechanics, as you aren't meant to mindlessly beat up the hallowed henchmen. Belly of the Floaters is a nice revamp of the Blackmoor 1 stage, and while admittedly build is way too overused here, the visuals look really nice and give you the abandoned ship vibes, and the Pac-Man stage is okay. Manor is interesting. As with visuals, it's meant to look more like an old storybook design. The maze is okay, and the mirror boss is just average. Real star of the show, however, is the Hallowed Knight himself, Lord Straxar. In terms of the overall lore, the Hallowed Knights bring into the world of Blackmoor 2, in comparison to Dragon's Den to Maximus 2, the Hallowed Knights have the best motherfucking lore by a landslide. Dragon's Den will never be as near or close to the Hallowed Knights in terms of story. Amongst the Hallowed Knights, if not all of the Forfats characters, Straxar has got to be the best character in terms of lore. And as someone who's been stuck thick and thin way before the inception of the Moof Games era, I am really surprised with how masterful the devs went with giving the Stage 3 boss from Maximus 1 an actual character. For those of you who are new to the FF community, I'll talk about the history of Straxar briefly. Straxar first appeared in the 2013 Moof game title called Maximus Sword of Dawn, or Maximus 1 for short. Straxar is only the 3rd main boss that you encounter in the game, and he fights you on a bridge at night. His Black Book description, however, is the least developed and most basic, as it doesn't provide any other information other than he's a bridge troll. Nothing about his alignment with Bison, nothing about being an elemental guardian, he's just a bridge troll. Yep. In his second appearance in Blackmoor, Dewberry's Quest, Straxar has a small improvement but still not much to talk about. He's a troll, but this is where he is confirmed to be an elemental guardian. Just like in the previous game, he's a boss fight, but he is an optional super boss fight. He's very deadly and very strong and overpowered. Nice change of pace from the original Maximus 1 fight. Now, in his latest appearance in Blackmoor 2, the devs really put in the time and effort into actually making Straxar a character, and his lore was improved very significantly. Straxar has a role as a final boss now, so he's no longer relegated as a throwaway boss fight like in the previous 2 games. I am honestly really impressed. When you first played these stages, you were to assume that Straxar is this evil villain who rises into power to cause mayhem and destruction. However, if you manage to encounter Straxar, you may notice that his eyes are now permanently lit up, whereas before they only lit up when he's doing an attack. Something is really off here. If you are a super OG fan, you might not even notice that there's another stark change to Straxar that you might overlooked. He no longer has his original voice clips.
Hush now. It's time for you to sleep.
Other than his jumping sound. His voice lines now sound a lot more crazy or downright insane. This is a detail I really loved about Straxar here. When you reach Phase 2, he stops and drinks a green potion, and it transformed him into the Hallowed Knight. You are not fighting Straxar here. You are fighting the Hallowed Knight. The direct side effect from drinking it is that you lose your sanity according to the druid who made it, which also adds depth into the story. It really emphasizes how much the potion has deteriorated his mentality and he's no longer thinking straight. I joked about this being an allegory of drinking alcohol because if you really think about it, it really checks some boxes. Potion makes Straxar go mad. It seemingly changes his appearance slightly and such. Coincidence? While admittedly the stages or some of the Forfats games in that matter don't have a cohesive story, the Hallowed Knights make up for that with providing such a really good prologue cutscene you unlock at the end that really helps bring in some context and origins of the Hallowed Knights militia. It really boosts up Straxar as a character in a degree that's very welcomed. According to the cutscene, he remains true to his role as a guardian and watches over one of the last villages. Unfortunately, the forces of Blackmoor's army were too strong, and subsequently he failed at protecting it. Very distraught from the failure of his inability to protect the people he was given responsibility to do so, he sought after the druid in hopes he can make him and his militia be able to fight off against Blackmoor's army and protect the people like he was meant to do in the first place. The druid says he can make a potion that would enhance his and his colleagues to a high degree if they get him owls, as owl feathers are one of the main ingredients for the potion to work. Straxar had his team of henchmen and high-ranking members to collect all of the owls in the village away from the townspeople. After doing this, the druid made the potion and gave Straxar and his militia bottles of it. The druid failed to mention the insane side effects of the potion beforehand, but Straxar's forces became so powerful that they fought off Blackmoor's army away from it. As a result, though, they became increasingly insane. Really intriguing. It really shows that Straxar is not in any way a villain, but more so an anti-hero, something that's never really been done before in a Forfats game. Straxar's motivation was very noble, but unfortunately misguided, that resulted in him being a villain character. Straxar really had a massive glow-up and a lot of layers. While difficulty isn't really an issue for me personally since I play on dark mode, I can't help but wonder what's with some of the enemies and bosses here. Like immediately, the first enemy in this expansion has Raven and Evil Dewberry's evade move. Like, are you serious? This made enemy Huggins more so annoying than difficult. The AI Huggins rolling move and Archer Girl are really annoying not for how much damage they do to you, but how freaking ridiculous they are at evading you. They don't make the game for more difficult, but rather to pad out the time you spend on this stage trying to kill them. I don't like having to be chasing a required enemy I need to kill in order to progress for more than 50 seconds. This really hinders my enjoyment on Owl Farm, which is already a bit of a mid-stage, and makes it feel like if the word filler is a Blackmoor 2 stage. The hut stage immediately slaps you out of sleeping from the dull Owl Farm stage and runs you over with a train. The enemies are okay-ish, but dealing with them is a bit of a hassle as you have to watch both sides. If you got hit, more than likely you'll get hit again, which deals a large chunk of damage on freaking multiplayer. Don't even get me started on Rat King, he's a legit menace. I'm okay with having tough AI fights, but Rat King is PvP dark. AI Clementine, but as a legit boss. Rat King spams the fuck out of heals, which for God knows what reason, still hits after the heart icon disappears. Fix the heal attack to where once it's over, it's over. OMG. Nothing to really say about the medieval football stage, really. Fun fact, when the update was still brand new, there were 3 hallowed henchmen on dark mode that you faced instead of 2. Pretty ridiculous, but at least that was patched to where it's now 2 hallowed henchmen. Belly of the Floaters overused the living hell out of build here. You have 3 encounters with build on this very stage alone, and it's not like each encounter you fight 1 build each. You fight 2 on the first 2 encounters each, and then if you go deeper in the 3rd encounter, you fight 3. that means you fucking fight 7. And just in case the game feels like you haven't fought Build enough, he's the first mini-boss in the Manor. The Bor Maze section is such a pain in the ass for large characters. 99.9% of the mirror characters are mid, but at least villains got fixed enough where it's just alright, to say the least. The Lur super boss fight can be a bit too unfair at times, but a lot better than Scar. Though just like Scar, he loves to pad the fight to woohoo. Seriously, nothing to really talk about with Lur here. That's really about it for my part of this very video. I would love to know some of your opinions about the Hallowed Knights DLC expansion stages in the comments down below. Now it's time for the guest in this video, Mecha Knuckle, to talk about his opinions of the Hallowed Knights DLC stages here as well. Moof Games Gamer out.
So here's the question. Is Hallowed Knights the best update in Blackmoor 2 history? In my opinion, yeah, there's no question about it, it is. Now, instead of talking about each individual level of Hallowed Knights, I'm going to be quickly firing off a comparison between it and all of the other content added in updates, as if I did go over each individual level, it would quickly devolve into an hour-long rant about Mirror. So, yeah. Alright, so let's talk about what Hallowed Knights is actually working with. So we have 5 levels, a red stage boss, and a new character. I'm going to be disregarding the fact that John Jacob exists, because he's just a PvP import. And now let's talk about what other updates added. Now, you have things like the red stage bosses, Scar and Nyan, which Lur is the best red stage boss in the game. He's not a reskin of an early game boss like Scar is, and I'm pretty sure I've had lengthier encounters with Straxar than I have Nyan. So, yeah, Nyan's pathetically easy. Lur's the winner by default. Then we move on to things like Endless, which are very disconnected from the game's core gameplay, and I don't see people play that all that often. There's usually at least one room in multiplayer, but still. And then you have things like Port Pig, which every time we get to, me and a group of randos get to Port Pig in multiplayer, everyone else just leaves the room and skips it and joins back on the next level, so that should tell you something. Then we move on to things like Boss Rush, which Boss Rush is probably the worst stage in the game. Let's see, what else? The PvP update, while not being bad, I actually quite like it, is very disconnected from the game's core identity. So, to call it the best update in the game's history is kind of dumb. Let's see. Then you have the villains updates. Now, you could argue that the villains offer more replay value than Hallowed Knights does. I do not agree with that. They're not different enough from each other to really, you know, make that argument. And you could argue that there's people out there who play through the game as every single character straight through. And, like, yeah, those people exist, but, like, they're doing it entirely just so they can say they've beaten the game as every single character. Not because they actually want to play through the game in a straight shoot with every single character, because every character is unique or interesting. That just isn't the case, like, at all. And now we move on to the final thing I wanted to compare, that being comparing Hallowed Knights to its successor in M2, which is Dragon's Den. Now, from a gameplay standpoint, Dragon's Den is 100% better than Hallowed Knights. Like, it's not even a competition. Hallowed Knights has things like Mirror, it has things like Medieval Football, which break up the flow of the 5 levels. And Dragon's Den is just a straight shoot of 5 levels. The closest thing it has to something that breaks the flow is the boat level, but does it really? Nah, it's just a less traditional regular stage. So yeah. Here's the thing though, from an aesthetic perspective and a storytelling perspective, Hallowed Knights is far superior. Like, Hallowed Knights is a disconnected campaign, which means that, you know, it doesn't have that issue Dragon's Den has, where it's just a noticeably less satisfying ending than base Maximus 2 had. Maximus 2's side campaign is treated like the second half of the game if you pick it instead of the other actual main route. Whereas Hallowed Knights is just a weird offshoot with its own storyline and ending, and I think that's far better from a storytelling perspective. There's also the whole aesthetic thing, like I said. The characters in Dragon's Den are noticeably less cartoony than those of past FF games and even base M2, and they also have a completely different aesthetic. It's like the first 2 stages of friggin' Dragon's Den actually fit the aesthetic, and then for whatever reason they shifted over to being a homage to Double Dragon instead of Golden Axe. It's even in the name, Dragon's Den, which, I mean, it's fine to do that. Double Dragon inspiration exists in other aspects of M2 and even past FF games, but the stark contrast between everything else in M2 and then, like, the 2 stages in Dragon's Den, like, it doesn't really work. In friggin' Hallowed Knights, everything was semi-cohesive, even though you had stages like Floaters and Manor, which didn't have the farm aesthetic going on. They still had the weird, corrupted, gross mutiny things going on within them, and they fit within the story. It makes sense for Hallowed Knights to look the way that it does. And you could argue that it makes sense for Dragon's Den to look the way that it does. But, like, really, does it make sense for there to just be a random ancient temple in a city? No. So yeah, I prefer Hallowed Knights to Dragon's Den, even though Dragon's Den, I think, is objectively the better update.